Good evening, YouTube. I know I promised a Brexit video, and that is still forthcoming. However, I feel the need to address certain events that have occurred in Dallas and across the country. On Thursday, 12 officers were shot and 5 were killed during a Black Lives Matter protest. They were assaulted by 4 snipers. Along with that, there were attacks in 3 other states. Police officers were ambushed and shot in St. Louis, Missouri, and Valdosta, Georgia, and along a highway in Tennessee. These incidents, more than anything, have been inspired and encouraged by the violent and divisive message of the BLM movement, which has called for violence and unrest unless their demands are met. While I cannot deny the protests over these incidents and stuff have caused a dialogue to start about police brutality in this country, the racist message of BLM is divisive and disenfranchising to other victims of police violence. And it has also encouraged violence against cops. Since 2015, the number of on-the-job police fatalities has risen, and these recent incidents are not new or isolated, and just shocking. In short, the only thing BLM has achieved is a rise in domestic terrorism and the spread of a divisive message that disenfranchises other victims of police brutality by spreading a false narrative that police violence is about race and almost exclusively happens to one group. In this way, BLM hurts and eliminates any push to end police brutality, as it is a violent and racist movement. The violence they cause not only draws attention away from any narrative to solve these issues, it hurts victims of police brutality no matter what their skin color is, by making some parties more sympathetic to the police. As a Caucasian victim of police violence, I have sat back and watched in disgust as this has gotten worse, without a voice of my own, since people of other races being shot is not big news. Here are some fun statistics to dispel lies spread by the BLM movement. In 2015, there were 1,186 police shootings in the United States. The state with the least amount of shootings was a 3-way tie between Rhode Island, Vermont, and North Dakota, with 1 shooting in each state. The state that saw the most shootings was California, with 213 deaths. The overwhelming majority of these shooting victims were men. The next statistic totally shatters BLM's lies. In about 500 of these incidents, the victim was Caucasian. African Americans came in second with a little over 300 victims of police shootings. Latinos in third with around 200 victims. And there were less than 100 Asian and Native American victims, even combining both statistical groups. Those are facts. So why doesn't BLM claim that, that this is a class issue? Why do they claim that African Americans are overwhelmingly targeted when they are only the second most targeted racial group in 2015 according to the statistics? In fact, it wasn't just 2016. Detailed statistics show that between 2003 and 2009, 41.7% of police shooting victims were white, 31.7% were African American, 20.3% were Latino, and 6.4% were Asian or Native American. Going over 10 years back, statistically, BLM's claims are lies, and that is unacceptable. These lies and the reality around them upset me. As I mentioned earlier, I have multiple times in my life been a victim of police brutality and corruption. When I was 14, I was maced by the police for defending myself against a larger boy attacking me. I defended myself with a metal pole, and during this incident, I almost suffocated, since the officers responding held my face in the dirt even though I was visibly showing signs I had trouble breathing because of the mace. When I was 18, I was arrested by cops for defending my little brother and his friend from a bunch of skateboarders trying to beat them in the head with their skateboards. Now, this incident really came back to haunt my dreams last year, after the death of Freddie Gray, because just like Mr. Gray, I too was handcuffed, and the officers intentionally took hard turns on their way to the precinct, intended to knock me onto the floor and toss me around to cause injury. This was before they had belts in these vans as well. I have no doubt, however, if I had even died like that, there would have been no public outrage. The last incident of police brutality and corruption I have ran into was when I was 21, and it's a long story since it also includes judicial corruption. When I was 21, I was arrested after calling the police about a drunk woman who threatened to cut the throats of me and about a dozen men at a public transit stop. In their report, they labeled me as suspicious and also claimed that I waived my Miranda rights and consent to a search at the time, in which they found a pocket knife on me. They also added a false confession. Well, I indeed had a knife, and most people in my city, truth be told, carry knives for self-defense. The officers in question never read me my Miranda rights, and they held me at taser point while searching me, during which time I at no point gave them any consent to search me. And at no point did they interview any potential witnesses on the train. They only talked to the woman, who I called the cops on, and who had thrown out accusations that I had threatened her when the police arrived, even though she was clearly either intoxicated or mentally unstable, and even though my phone records and my call logs clearly indicate I was the one who made the 911 call. They still arrested me, held me for 4 hours without reading me my rights or allowing me to call a lawyer, and then arraigned me. The next day, a bail judge ignored my request to postpone a hearing until I obtained legal representation, and slapped me with $80,000 bail. A bail which, after a month of incarceration later, a judge of the second bail hearing would lower to $10,000, stating that she believed the original bail to be unjustified and outrageous. I am no stranger to violence and a corrupt system, and I happen to be what you would call white. Now, if the BLM narrative is a race-baiting lie, then what explains police violence, you ask? Primarily a corrupt system like the one I described, and poverty, i.e. being poor, like I was, and still am to some degree, makes you an easy target since you don't have the money to adequately pursue justice in the legal system. Race very rarely plays a factor, though it does in some instances. This is a necessary fact we need to acknowledge going into any reform efforts, but which BLM screams about and tries to drown out, because acknowledging this crushes their racist message and takes away any power they have to continue dividing people. It's also interesting to note that while the spotlight members of the BLM movement are African American, a large fraction of the BLM movement are ignorant white college liberals, who are the ones who mostly buy into this racist message. That makes it equally insulting, since these little spoon-fed brats have never faced any sort of violence from the police in their lives, and never will, since their families have the cash to bail them out of their crap, and have the cash to send them to a college where they never study, unlike myself, who had to work hard to pay for his college education. They are the last people, period, with the right to an opinion on this issue, and the last people to represent actual victims. They are nothing more than the loud, idiotic puppets of a few individuals. And let's face it, BLM is just a domestic terrorist group headed by a few angry racists that causes civil unrest and violence. They now do nothing to help or solve the problem, and they distract people from it. BLM focuses on only a fraction of cases. If they truly cared about combating police brutality, where was their outrage of the shooting of 19-year-old Zachary Hammond in North Carolina last year, when he resisted arrest as a cop tried to go and plant cannabis on him during a traffic stop? Or how about the death of Benito Osorio at the hands of police in Los Angeles? Most tragic is what happened this January to Miss Jacqueline Selliers, who is a member of the Puyallup tribe and was shot in Tacoma, Washington. Despite police claims she tried to flee in her vehicle and was shot after being spotted with a known felon, wounds on her body indicate her arm is broken by a beating before she was shot in the temple. She was also pregnant, so 2 people were brutally executed by police officers involved in this. Where was the outrage by BLM? It did not exist, and the only group outraged by her death is the Native Lives Matter movement, which is largely ignored by the media, since they do not have a racist and divisive message like the BLM, and don't make threats of violence or claim they are the sole victims. Because she is Native American, and because because the people who advocate for her are not advocating for violence, she has been ignored. Leftists, they thrive on racism and division. For BLM to acknowledge that any of the tragedies I mentioned above happened would be to admit that they have lied and tried to cause division. Quite frankly, the only reason these tragedies did not outrage BLM was because the victims were not black. Then, of course, people will insist BLM isn't racist. Here's how that conversation plays out in a nice little chair sketch. Why do you think BLM isn't racist? Black people are being targeted by the police. Why not all lives matter, though? All lives matter is just meant to dismiss the black struggle. Well, you know, whites and Native Americans and Latinos also largely face police violence. Don't you think BLM dismisses their struggles too? At this point, the conversation devolves into them using the term white privilege and accusing me of being racist while they are ignoring statistics. And did I mention, by the way, it's usually the white ones that talk like this and claim that minorities can't be racist because racism requires a systematic something or another. In 2016, somehow people have deluded themselves over the definition of racism. Let me refresh you all. Racism, as defined by the Webster's Dictionary, is the poor treatment or violence against people because of their race, or the belief that some races of people are better than others. There's nothing in it about power structures. In short, anybody can be racist, whether they are black, or white, or Latino. And even more amazing is that people can be racist towards people of their own ethnicity, apparently. It's happened a lot of times. Anyway, back to the point. Actually, I have to make a side point, because I did mention all lives matter before, and admittedly some people have used that as a dismissive thing. However, it is not, and it needs to be claimed as a unifying message. Back to the point, though. BLM has dealt in nothing but lies and violence. They only get attention because they are divisive and violent and get ratings on TV. When you examine the facts, though, their claims and rhetoric crumble, quite possibly because their divisiveness plays into the agenda of certain parties. They continue to get attention, and facts continue to be ignored or dismissed with some flimsy pretext for dismissing them. They do not care about ending an epidemic in this country that affects the poorest and most disenfranchised people in the country and costs the lives of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people in the U.S. every year. They are the worst kind of domestic terrorists, as they not only cause destruction and violence and disorder, they also spread lies and divide people, so they can't fight back and solve a problem which plagues us all. They prevent us from making this country a better and safer place to live, for everyone, no matter the color of their skin. And we need to start fighting back against that, whether we are white or black or Latino or any other race. Because barring any of us winning the lottery tomorrow and winning millions of dollars or already possessing great wealth, we could be the next statistic to be exploited or ignored. Thank you for your time. Hey there, so this is probably the second time I've had to do a few editorial corrections on my video, mainly today because of this heat wave on the East Coast. It's hard to talk, much less think, because of the dry mouth, and so I might have mumbled a few words, like my $80,000 bail, or the fact that it was 2015 most of these incidents happened in, minus the one with the Native American woman, though I think there was one in 2015 where a Native American child was killed in her crib during a police raid, but I was not able to find any information on that. Anyway, start with editorial corrections. The first thing, and I noticed a lot of my stuff that I was saying was ambiguous, and so that's what I'm here to correct, is the ambiguously stated things. The first ambiguous statement was in that little chair play I did, and as I clarified, that was an imitation of what white college liberals did, or how white college liberals talk when you challenge them over the BLM movement. In no way am I dismissing the African American struggle, which luckily has gotten to be more optimistic that you guys are going to get over that in the past 20 years, because honestly, with the fact that racism is now no longer accepted, and with civil rights laws in place, the African American community is doing so much better. We're seeing African American CEOs, African American business owners, and it's great. It makes me happy to see that. So, honestly, that's why I'm even more insulted when white college liberals throw out the black struggle, like they can use that to justify their argument. They have never faced struggle, much less the African American struggle, and considering their grandparents and great-grandparents were probably horrible racists themselves, it's just the biggest hypocrisy and the biggest insult. I mean, I'm not even African American, and I'm insulted when I hear them try and use that as a justification for any argument. Because they have no right to. They have no right to take your struggles and use it for their opportunistic thing. So that's the page we're on with that. I also mentioned All Lives Matter movement, and yes, I did acknowledge that some people use it to dismiss the claims of, police violence being a thing that affects African Americans. However, they have not used it so much to defy as to dismiss, and to be honest, it's a term that needs to be claimed, to be reclaimed, because that is a message we can unify under, that all lives matter, that every victim of police violence matters, whether they are Latino, whether they are white, whether they are black, whether they are Asian, whether they are Native American, and that even the lives of police officers do matter, because we are not going to gain any victory by killing them or by having them go down in unfair trials. Our victory will be the day that one of them goes down in court because there is a clear-cut case against them, and when the courts themselves have to admit that a police officer committed a crime. And that day is going to come someday very soon, and I honestly look forward to it. Now, on the subject of the statistics, I'm sure some people would say that I'm using those, again, to dismiss the African Americans being targeted by police violence. But no, I'm using those as a basis of fact. In fact, in no way does it dismiss it, because if you look at the census records at the time, the amount of police killings of a certain racial group is proportionate to the spread of the population at the time. In short, a proportionate number of whites was shot compared to the population of white people. A proportionate number of blacks was shot compared to the black population, etc., etc. I think the only one that might not have been completely proportionate was Asians and Native Americans, but I'd have to look back at that. And then again, Asians would make up most of that statistic. But again, I'd have to look further into that. The point is, on its face, when you look at these statistics, it's all about proportion. Though I think if you went deeper into these statistics, we'd also see one thing that is disproportionate. In fact, completely disproportionate, in that we'd probably see most of these victims, despite their race, all were financially disadvantaged and stuff. In short, all of them were economically impoverished, and that is where police violence stems from, is police feeling bold enough that they can kill people, because these people do not have the financial means to seek justice, and their families do not have the financial means to seek justice. So that's one thing we need to acknowledge, is that statistics show that police violence affects us all equally, and that police violence is a class thing. And I mean, the other point that those statistics make is that a lot of these incidents go widely ignored, and that should be a point of outrage, because all lives do matter, and any instance of police violence is something that needs to be paid attention to, no matter who the victim is. Because we can't go and solve this problem by ignoring some victims, and that's something we definitely need to going forward, need to acknowledge, is that we need to pay attention to every victim. Finally, I would like to note that there are some great people in the BLM movement. They just happen to be part of a bad movement, politically and stuff. And honestly, I have luckily seen a lot of people distancing themselves from the BLM movement, personal friends of mine and stuff. One of them actually distanced herself from this movement the moment it began here in Baltimore, because the riots caused by that kept her out of work, and that's what we need to acknowledge, is that the BLM movement mainly hurts African Americans and working class people when they shut down highways, and that actually pisses me off a lot more than the riots, because it's usually the little white college millennials doing that, since they don't have the balls to riot. And, you know, when these protests happen and martial law has to be declared, it affects people who need to get to work, like my friend did the night of the Freddie Gray protests and everything. I mean, she couldn't get to her job at the new casino. That was lost wages for her, and it hurts that. And I'm beginning to see a lot of the good people in the movement who are in there for the right reasons, waking up to this and seeing this. And what I would love to see is these well-intentioned people who actually care about the issue of police brutality start their own movement. Start an ALM movement, you know. Because that would be great if we could unify under one banner and tackle this issue. That's what we need to do, is unify and tackle the issue. Because divided we fall, united we stand. Anyway, that's all I can think of right now. If there's anything I did not clarify in this editorial correction that you would like an answer on, please leave your question in the comments. I'll approve it and answer your question to the best of my ability, and you can follow up with any other questions, because I, by all means, would like to clarify or be corrected if something I put out there happened to be statistically wrong, though statistically I did, you know, check these and everything, and they're pretty legit statistics. But if you have anything to add, that would be great. And if you have anything to contest, or just anything you're unclear on, because honestly today it is hot as hell and I am having a hard time even reading my own stuff. And so, anyway, leave that